ka macam begitu ah.
Hey guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Thank you for finding us. If you're not subscribed and you feel like subscribing, it could be a huge help. I know that I say that all the time. I know I sound like a broken record, but it does make a difference, trust me. And it helps the channel a lot. And so, it raises our profile. It raises us in the algorithm. The more subs we get, the more comments we get, the more likes we get, which allows us to do more reviews and more content and all that other fun stuff, and helps us understand what people are watching and what they like and everything like that. So if you like Hong Kong films, if you like Blu-rays, if you like Blu-ray reviews, if you like Andy Lau and everything else that I will be talking about in this video, and you feel like subscribing, it would be much appreciated. Thank you so much. A huge shout out to our patrons. This channel would not operate the way it does without them. You can sign up for $2 a month, $5 a month. I do wicked early release videos, and I do a bunch of other stuff. I do exclusive videos in there and various other types of content. Obviously no pressure, but if you feel like signing up, we've had a few new patrons join within the last couple weeks. It's been really awesome. I've had some fun, really interesting conversations with some of those new patrons in the like the chat, whatever message inbox function thing that they have in Patreon. Let's get right into this video because I've talked too much in the intro. It's a moment of romance. So I have been dying to see this movie for a couple of years. I have 2 DVD copies of it, and now there's a Blu-ray from Radiance Films, and so I have finally gotten around to watching it because I was forced to review the Blu-ray. So I was very happy when they announced this because I was like, this will force me to watch this movie because the DVDs just keep sinking lower and lower in my pile. But everyone keeps telling me, especially since I did a really glowing review of As Tears Go By, the Wong Kar-wai film, which stars Andy Lau from 1988, I believe that movie came out. Everyone has been telling me you have to see A Moment of Romance because if you love As Tears Go By, you are going to love this movie. And guess what? Those people were not wrong. I loved this movie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about the physical release here. I'm going to show everything off to you. I'm going to talk to you about the bonus material that's on here. This is a Region A and Region B release, so you can watch it in both places. It's from Radiance Films, which is a relatively new label that was started by someone who worked for Arrow for a very long time. They have U.S. distribution from MVD, which is a great company that does the MVD Rewind collection, which has put out lots of awesome movies like Nemesis, which is a movie I really love, the Albert Pune film, and they did the Double Impact, the Van Damme movie, and a bunch of other awesome stuff like that. And so let me show this off for you. But before I do that, actually, let me just give you the basic info about the film. It ran in Hong Kong from June 14th until July 26th of 1990. It made 14 million Hong Kong dollars at the time of its initial release. And I think I read it was re-released and made a ton of money again upon its re-release. From what I understand, obviously I didn't grow up in Hong Kong. I wasn't in Hong Kong in 1990, but from what I understand, this movie is really culturally and historically significant, especially within youth culture of Hong Kong in the the early 90s. Apparently, Andy Lau was referred to for a while and is sometimes still referred to as Hua Di, which is the name of his character in this film. So this became like a very iconic kind of like career-defining character for him in a way. Let me tell you some more about this movie. It was directed by Benny Chan, and this was his first movie as solo director. He had, from what I gathered, he directed one movie before this as co-director, but this was his first movie as the only director on a film. If you don't know who Benny Chan is, he directed Who Am I?, the classic Jackie Chan film. He directed New Police Story, which is another Jackie Chan film. He directed White Storm, which is a more recent film that did really well. I think 2013 that movie came out, and then his last film, he passed away very sadly, very recently. His last film was Raging Fire with Donnie Yen, which is a movie that a lot of fans really love and think is a fantastic film. And then this movie was written by James Yoon, which is worth pointing out. He wrote Curry and Pepper, which is a very popular like buddy cop comedy type of movie from the early 90s. And then he also wrote, this is just a random thing that I wrote down, but I thought it was interesting. He wrote Cash on Delivery, which is a Simon Yam Category 3 movie. So he was doing like romance, melodrama, heroic bloodshed type of stuff. He was doing comedy. He was doing Category 3. Like his career is kind of all over the place. It's pretty interesting. And then he wrote Manhunt, the John Woo film from 2017. So he had a pretty illustrious career. Andy Lau, like I said, is the star of this film. Jacqueline Wu is in this film. I don't really know her that well. I'm not super familiar with her career. And I thought she was really well cast in this film. her character is kind of reticent and internalized, and she does a really good job of being very shy and kind of evasive, but not just being blank. Like, she does a good job of projecting this immense internal life while keeping that within herself. It's a very good performance from her. Ingmar Tot is in this film. He's very famous. He's in like the Stephen Chow movies, and he was in My Heart Is That Eternal Rose, and you'll definitely recognize him. I think he won Best Supporting Actor at the Hong Kong Film Awards for this movie. And then Tommy Wong, who is in I think he's in The Killer, and he's in like a ton of Ringo Lam movies from that period. This movie was produced by Johnny To and Ringo Lam. And I do see a little bit of Ringo Lam and Johnny To influence in the film, although Betty Chan definitely has his own kind of approach and style in this film. I also want to talk briefly about the directors of photography / cinematographers for this film. There were 2 cinematographers on this film, which is not uncommon for Hong Kong films from this era. One of them was Horace Wong. This guy shot some movies you may have heard of. I wrote down a list of them because I wanted to read them to you. Horace Wong was the DP. So it's interesting, on Hong Kong Movie Database, a DP, which is director of photography, and cinematographer are different sections on the site, but it's basically the same. It's the same job. So I don't know. I guess it's just whatever they're credited as in the credits of the film. But so these are the movies that he was either cinematographer or director of photography on: A Better Tomorrow, A Better Tomorrow 2, The Big Heat, The Killer, A Better Tomorrow 3, Bullet in the Head, Hard Boiled, The Barefoot Kid, King of Comedy, A Chinese Ghost Story, All About All Along, Twin Dragons, Thunderbolt, and then, pretty recently, Special ID with Donnie Yen. Yeah, that's a hell of a career. The other cinematographer on this movie, Joe Chan, shot Organized Crime and Triad Bureau, Esprit d'Amour, which is Ringo Lam's first film, which I reviewed in Patreon recently, which is a freaking great movie. I loved it. The Eighth Happiness, Tiger on Beat, School on Fire. He did Full Contact, Crime Story. He 8 Troublesome Night films, I believe, which are movies that are look really great. Like, have you ever seen clips from any of those? So it's an anthology horror series. There's like 20-something of them, I think. And it's like 3, I think each movie is like 3 or 4 like 20-minute long stories. But they have a really unique, very cool look to them. And he shot, I think, 8 of those films. And then he's listed as a DP. This is really interesting to me, on Fallen Angels, which was a Wong Kar-wai film, which was very famously shot by Chris Doyle. So I wonder if he was one of the other DPs on there, camera operator. I don't know exactly what his involvement in that movie was, but that was very interesting. Maybe Chris Doyle was the main DP and he had other guys working with him. August 21st of 2023 is when the Radiance film release comes out. So this is the limited edition version that I have here, which is, I think, 2,000 copies, and you can see the front and the back, and this is artwork from, it's written right here on the back, so let me read it to you, Time Tomorrow. So this thing here that wraps around is a strip of paper. If you've seen other Radiance Films releases, you'll be familiar with this, because this is something they use. It's got like a little catalog inside of it there, see? But that's got the bonus material and stuff. And you can pull that out so that you can have like completely clean artwork on the front and the back here. This also has reversible artwork. So here's the inside. And the reversible artwork is this old school Hong Kong poster for this, which you can see here. And then the booklet has a couple different pieces of writing in it. Sean Gilman essay, and there's an essay specifically about Betty Chan by Tony Williams. So you can see the cast and the crew is listed here. I really like this paper stock. It's like nice, kind of like matte, but it's also like very nice to the touch. And if you watch this channel, you know I like the smell of paper. So there's the cast and the crew, like I said. And then here's the first essay here. And there you got like posters and various other images nestled in with the pages. And then the second essay. So here's like a big double-sided image thing. And then you get this. So I was just looking at this shot thinking, like, you can see her reflected in the mirror, so you can see both of their faces, but you have this very natural setup of her sitting on the bed and him standing at the window. This movie looks freaking incredible. This is a really well done remaster. I think it was remastered in 4K for this release. But with that level of cinematography talent, like, the city of Hong Kong looks freaking incredible in this movie. If you watch this channel, I'm a big fan of weather in movies. It just gives so much context and so much depth. And the way in which, movies that were shot on celluloid preserve weather, it just gives you such an amazing sense of being in a place at a time. And there's one particular sequence in this film where the Andy Lau character and the Jacqueline Wu character are out it's the Jacqueline Wu character's birthday, and Andy Lau drives a motorcycle, and so they're out like in the center of Hong Kong. You see like the city behind them, and he gets her a cake for her birthday, and it's misting, like you can tell it's gonna rain, and then it shows them later on driving in the pouring rain, and you can see their breath, and it gives you such a strong sense of being in this place. It's so well preserved. This is a movie that really moves at like the pace of life, which is, you hear a lot about Wong Kar-wai influence on this film, and this movie really does remind me of As Tears Go By. The other movie that this movie really reminds me of is On the Wrong Track, which is an Andy Lau movie from 1983. And both of these movies are like tapped into car culture and like street racing and like wayward youth and people who live in these worlds of violence and poverty and stuff like that. And in a way, I feel like On the Wrong Track, As Tears Go By, and Moment of Romance are like this unofficial, all different directors, because Clarence Falk directed On the Wrong Track, I believe, and then obviously Wong Kar-wai did As Tears Go By. This is Benny Chan. Different writers, different directors, but it's like this thematic trilogy of doomed youth starring Andy Lau. These kind of like fatalistic films where the characters are just, it seems like they're just destined to meet these tragic fates no matter what they do. And the characters themselves have this strong sense of fatalism. And the Andy Lau characters in each of these films, there are things that distinguish them from one another, but in a way they're very similar. And I love all three of those. It would be a really good triple feature. Maybe one day if I ever have time to do that. Let me just tell you what else is on here as bonus material, and then I will get deeper into my thoughts on the film. There's a Betty Chan interview. It's 21 minutes long. It's audio only. So when you play it on your TV, you'll see a picture of Benny Chan, and then there's people talking. There's a David Desser video essay, which is 26 minutes long. It's very academic and like dives into various aspects of the film. And you get a Frank Jane commentary, which is very, very good. I'm going to focus on the film itself rather than the bonus material and stuff like that, because this is my first time seeing the movie, and I have a lot of thoughts on this film, and I really want to talk about it. Like, this is exactly the kind of movie I love. I love coming of age movies. I love movies that have really high emotional stakes, that are very earnest about emotions, that are in a way like borderline melodramas, but that take place in these worlds of crime and violence and stuff like that. I love films that take place in the late 80s into the early 90s in like urban Hong Kong, that have the landscape and the setting and everything like that. I'm a big fan of romance films, and this movie is like all of those things. I'm a huge Wong Kar-wai fan. Obviously, this film has a lot of similarities with As Tears Go By. Like I said, it also does remind me of Ringo Lam. It's a very character-driven film. It's basically like a drama slash melodrama slash romance in a world of crime, but it doesn't have the kind of more hyperbolic tendencies of John Woo, where you get these shootouts with like 50 people double fisting guns and stuff like that, which is not an insult to John Woo. I'm a huge John Woo fan, but those movies take place in like a different kind of universe. This movie is more grounded. It's more oriented on realistic characters, and that reminds me of Ringo Lam. There's a jewelry heist in this film that really reminded me of Ringo Lam, and the jewelry heist in City on Fire, and the way that Ringo Lam shoots violence, and that he has this sense of like realism and groundedness, but he's also got this very edgy, restless, tense energy to his films. And this film kind of reminded me of that. But it also had this kind of whimsical, romantic, fatalistic youth thing that's very Wong Kar-wai and very kind of like Hong Kong youth film in general, which is not a genre I know a ton about, but I have been learning a lot about it through the re-releases of like the Wong Kar-wai films and other movies like that. I'm just looking at my notes here, a strong sense of fatalism. Okay, so this is something else I wanted to talk about. I think one of the reasons this movie is really successful is that even though it is a very fatalistic film and it has like strains of nihilism in it, and it's very violent and it can be really brutal, and it's got this kind of central romance that you just kind of feel from the outset is kind of doomed to fail. It's an extremely earnest film, and it's a very unabashedly emotional film, and it's a film that really dives like headlong into the overblown emotions of youth and gives them a lot of validity. It doesn't belittle them. It doesn't make them totally ridiculous and over the top. It doesn't make the intense emotional like trials and tribulations of people in their teens and 20s out to be something silly in a way that a movie could, when looking kind of back from an adult perspective, being like, oh, why did we get so wrapped up in that crap? Like, it really gives a lot of validity and honors the insane conflicting emotions, the romance, the sexuality, the violence of that period in people's lives, the confusion, the fact that they're lost and looking for meaning. There's a really strong focus on the tension between responsibility and desire in this film, which you see a lot in teen movies because, as you're coming into your teen years, and you're starting to take on more responsibility. You have more responsibility to other people, to your parents, to your family, to your siblings, whoever is in your life that's really important to you. And yet you have things that you really want to do, right? And you have social obligations, like you're supposed to be going to school, or you might have to get a job, but you want to, I don't know, you want to go travel, or you want to go sleep with these people, or you want to go party and do drugs, or you want to, Andy Lau is a racer in this movie. So he's like a street racer. He does motorcycle racing. And the kind of the plot of this film is that Andy Lau is his big brother in the Triad organization, asks him to be a getaway driver for this other group of triads who hate Andy Lau and he hates them. But basically his big brother is like, this is good. It benefits the whole brotherhood. So even though I know they hate you and you hate them, you're the best driver around and they really need the best driver. Could you do it? And then the whole thing blows up and goes wrong. The cops show up. Andy Lau gets away. They get away. But Andy Lau has to take a hostage who is the Jacqueline Wu character. And he and the hostage kind of fall in love with each other. But this other group of triads wants to kill the hostage because she's seen their faces. So there's all this tension and violence between them. And they're like on the run and they're falling in love. And it's this very like, in a way, like it has very overblown emotions. I almost said over the top. It's not over the top though, because it grounds it. They're very different characters. And you have this Romeo and Juliet opposites attract kind of thing, right? Because the Andy Lau character he grew up on the streets and he didn't have his parents around. He was raised by these three women who are basically like his aunts, and he grew up poor and he's not super well educated, and he got into the triads at a young age, and he's just kind of this street punk kid. And this movie, like watching this movie, having watched a fair number of Andy Lau movies in the past couple of years, I really, really started to appreciate Andy Lau's very unique qualities as a movie star and as an actor. He's not Chow Yun-fat, right? He's like edgier than him. He's got this more fatalistic, almost like nihilistic, like he's like this live wire in these films. Whereas with Chow Yun-fat, I feel like he has this innate decency, dignity to him, and then he can go into that crazy, violent, he lost his temper, he's going to kill everyone mode, right? Like in Hard Boiled and stuff. But his default mode is more of like the dignified, suave, funny, kind, charming character. Andy Lau can be very charming, handsome, kind, romantic, but he is constantly on the precipice of losing it. Like there's this intense, restless energy to Andy Lau that translates so well into these youth characters who are caught in these places of confusion and violence and stuff like that. And he's not like Tony Leung, where he's a more serious, internalized actor. Andy Lau is very physical and externalized. In a way, he almost reminds me of young Toshiro Mifune in the way that he's so quick to get violent and physical and aggressive, and he's constantly on edge, and he just has this dangerous energy where you know that if he gets set off the wrong way, bad things are going to happen, and he can handle himself well in a fight. And there's just this edginess and tension to him that I didn't really fully appreciate until watching this movie after having watched several of his other films and really thinking about his unique qualities as an actor, right? So you have him, very poor and growing up on the streets and stuff. Then you have the Jacqueline Wu character who's from an extremely wealthy family. Her parents are like off in Canada starting these businesses, and they're going to come back for her, and she's going to go to college in Canada. She's 17 years old. Her whole life has been laid out before her. So it is this Romeo and Juliet thing of opposites attract, and yet at the same time, what I think is really beautiful about this film is that it shows you in a legitimate, grounded, meaningful way that even though they are opposites kind of cosmetically, they're very, very similar in key ways that attract them to one another. And that's where that notion of the opposites attract come from. They're both very lonely people, and they're both very emotional people who don't really have outlets for their emotions. And they're both very romantic people, and they're people who really want to kind of go out and live their lives, but are stuck in these systems where they're being forced into these directions that are taking them away from their desires and pushing them into obligation that is obligation forced onto them by external forces that they feel this kind of fatalistic sense that they can never escape. And that draws them together, and they fall in love with one another, and they have a very beautiful and very meaningful relationship. The music in this movie is freaking incredible. It's so good, and it does such a good job of accentuating and highlighting their emotions. There's a lot of fire imagery in this movie, like burning cars and exploding vehicles and like stuff like that. And I think, and there's actually a character, or there's a moment, excuse me, where one character says, I don't think I wrote the exact quote down, but they said something like they burned themselves playing with fire. And as I was watching the movie, I'm like, that kind of feels like a statement on these characters and their romance, and the fact that they dared to be in love and to be open and to be bold about it in the face of all of these obligations they have, and the fact that they're such different people from different walks of life. They played with fire and they get burned, kind of thing. It's a really interesting line that is actually plays practically into what's going on in the scene, but describes the film in a way that I thought was really kind of profound and beautiful. It's just like, this is just like, it's this really, I know I keep saying this, but it's this very earnest, emotional, romantic film that really lives at the edge of all of these really intense emotions that you could really relate to if you were young and in love and in these conflicting and confusing situations. And obviously, you know, I wasn't a motorcycle racer, you know, running with the triads, and my parents weren't these extremely wealthy people who own this, you know, company in Canada. So I can't realistically relate to these two characters specifically, but the rawness of their emotions and the universal quality of their emotions I can relate to. And it's a really profound romantic story that I think is really beautifully handled. And I really love the fact that it, you know, like My Heart Is That Eternal Rose, like As Tears Go By, this movie makes a very bold declaration of like, this is a crime world, but instead of being like just a full-blown crime thriller about violence and all this other stuff, we're going to put human emotions and romance at the center of the film and ground it in that. And so it becomes this very melodramatic thing, but in a way that there's no false notes in this film. All of the emotion is very earnest and honest and handled really, really well. And I think that's what kind of stitches together all of the elements of this film and makes the whole engine run so smoothly. I'm just going to look at my notes and see if there's anything else I wanted to say, but I think that's a pretty good overview of my thoughts on this film. It's just a really well done, beautiful romance, but also a very good crime thriller that looks incredible. Amazing performance from Andy Lau. Like I said, I thought Jacqueline Wu is fantastic. Not super familiar with her, but I loved her performance in this, and it's an amazing release from Radiance Films. So if you are a fan of As Tears Go By, On the Wrong Track, any of those other kind of like Andy Lau type of youth films, other, you know, movies like Wild Search, I think would be a really good point of comparison for this film, because it's a character-driven romantic crime film, much like that film is. I go out and buy this immediately. You know, a lot of people have been on social media recently talking about like, this is an absolutely classic film. Thank you so much to Radiance Films for giving it the respect and the kind of treatment that it deserves on this incredible release. And I am not going to disagree with that. This is my first time seeing it, so I can't claim to be one of these people who's like, yes, that's been one of my favorite movies for years, but it is now one of my, I added this to my, I just added Enter the Dragon to my top 4 on Letterboxd, and I added this one too. I couldn't help myself. I loved it so much. So my name is Will. You're watching Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Shout out to Radiance for putting this out. Shout out to MVD for distributing it, excuse me, in the US region A. My name is Will. You're watching Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. I think I just said that twice in like a minute. Let me know in the comments what you think about this film, what you think about this release, which other movies I should be watching. If you know I love this, if I loved As Tears Go By, if I loved On the Wrong Track, what else should I watch? Let me know.